Hello guys, Panzermeister36 here today. This is going to be a paint review of a brand new paint for 2024. That is the Atom line by Migamo. These are a brand new line of water-based acrylic paints designed for both airbrushing and brush painting applications. Ammo sent me these paints to review, though they're not paying me to say good things about it, so I'm going to try to give you guys an unbiased review today. Now these paints, as far as I'm aware, are only currently available in these 12 packs. They might currently, or I would not be surprised if in the future, available individually. But they seem to be catered more towards maybe beginners or people who are just looking for a set of paints catered towards them, a palette. It's very common for me to get questions on this channel by people who are confused with all the different paints and products in this hobby. One of these sets will take away a lot of that guesswork for a given project. So for example, this is a set for Russian armor of World War II, which has just about every green you could ever dream of, and a few other bonus paints in there. So you have colors for the base painting, the markings, detail painting, chipping effects, even color modulation, all in one palette here. Now Ammo also included this paper, which gives some information for me. These paints are fast drying in a time of 10 minutes. Cure in 24 hours. They feature an exclusive water-based non-toxic formula which behaves like lacquer paints. They're odorless, self-leveling, and they're perfect for beginner and expert modelers of any theme. Now the comparison there to lacquer paints is very interesting to me. I'm one of the people who likes to spray with lacquer paints. I find them to be much more durable, have better coverage, easier to spray, more smooth application, and so on, better self-leveling properties when compared to water-based acrylics, as we see many varieties of which on the screen right now. Now, water-based acrylics are a lot less toxic. They don't have the volatile organic compounds that you would have in a lacquer. So many people like these water-based acrylics because there's a lot less health concerns, less ventilation concern. So there's other benefits to water-based paints. This new Atom paint promises to try to get some of those benefits of the lacquer paints, for example, the 3 on screen now, in a water-based non-toxic formula. So we're going to test that out today. I've got a whole battery of tests on screen here that I'm going to subject these new Atom paints to see how well they compare to other water-based paints in my experience and see if they bring some benefits of the lacquer-based style paints. Hope you guys enjoy. So to begin, on a primed surface with Ammo acrylic primer, this is the Atom 4BO green, airbrushed with no thinning, and it actually sprays half decently, unthinned, but the atomization is not perfect. You can see pebbling around the edges there, so we have to thin it for better application. After some trial and error, I am spraying it here with about 60% thinner to 40% paint, at about 28 psi, approaching 30 psi. That's a little bit higher pressure than I would usually spray, but that's required with water-based paints. And in this mixing ratio and at this pressure, it is spraying perfectly how I like to spray my paint. You can see it's a thin application that I'm building up by going back in a few thin coats. It's not going on super wet, so I can just keep going back and forth without flooding it and having paint run everywhere. This is exactly how I like to paint. I have the rust color thinned with 80% thinner to 20% paint. I've dialed the pressure down to about 22 psi, which is a little bit higher than I would typically, but that's what is required to spray this paint, and it sprays perfectly fine in thin, squiggly camouflage applications here. I'm impressed with this. This is the best experience I've had with water-based paints through the airbrush, and I'm just thinning them with that standard MIG Ammo thinner. So here I'm just having some fun with the camouflage with some horrendous colors I picked, but we're testing the application here basically, and I have no complaints at all. This is actually very impressive. The paint is spraying well, atomizing well, and I can get some fine effects with a smooth finish. You can see the sheen on the front there. Now here I am doing the same thing with a lighter color. This way, with more contrast between the camouflage and the base, we'll be able to notice any issues with atomization, spatter, speckling, and there really isn't any issue. It is spraying very well. The atomization, the edge is soft in a scale kind of way without unrealistic spatter and so on. I'm sure if you tried a retarder type thinner or some flow improver and so on, you could probably get this even more dialed in. I don't have any of those on hand because I don't work with water-based paints. I just use the standard MIG acrylic thinner. If this was a model I was seriously working on and not a paint mule, I would be perfectly fine with this camouflage application. My last area of concern with regarding airbrushing was to see how these hairspray chipped, because water-based paints generally are very bad for hairspray chipping. So I've airbrushed the brown chipping color over top of hairspray over top of the rust, and using a wet brush, I'm essentially activating the hairspray and revealing the underlying rust color. And these work very well. As expected, the chip size is a little bit larger because of the water-based paint, but this looks pretty decent for some hairspray chipping. Again, we are above the level of other water-based paints. Next up, I want to test their compatibility with various thinners. Now, it might not make sense to buy a water-based paint and then thin it with lacquer thinner, but there can be issues with water-based paint where you end up with trying to clean it out of your airbrush and then it gums up because of some chemical reaction. And it worked perfectly fine with all four. The lacquer thinner here, perfectly fine. Tamiya alcohol thinner, perfectly fine. Though it did have a weird effect with the surface tension, which made it very spread out a lot. I don't know. That shouldn't really be an issue for airbrushing. It might actually be beneficial. And of course, water and the MIG ammo thinner were perfectly fine. So I don't think you're going to have gumming up airbrush issues with this paint. I let the paint cure for 24 hours, and now we're going to test it against decal solvent and enamel thinner. Now that's a little bit strange, you might say, because generally you're going to be applying a varnish over your model before messing with those. And yes, you're right, but I have had personal experiences in the past where certain chemicals like these have kind of gotten underneath the varnishing corners and crept down through the paint and damaged it. It was very weird, but let's see how that works today. So I'm testing here the microsol over top of the Atom paint on a primed surface, and it was perfectly fine, durable, no issues at all. Though I did also test it on Atom paint applied on the bare plastic, and it did start to lift off the paint here. Now I'm testing enamel thinner over the primed and Atom painted surface. Again, no issue. Now the enamel thinner tested over an unprimed application of Atom, and after a fair amount of abrasion, I did kind of get some paint to flake off, but I don't think that's really going to be an issue. And on both surfaces, masking tape was not a concern. So this is much more durable than other water-based paints I've airbrushed. Lastly, let's look at some brush painting applications. Now, full disclosure here, I'm not exactly the world's best brush painter. I usually only paint little details and chips and so on. You should probably go find some wargaming channel that's reviewed this paint for a more accurate representation of how they brush paint over large surfaces. But here for some detail painting of the shovel and also some chipping effects I just did on the spot, these paints worked perfectly fine. I am 100% satisfied with how these worked. I thinned them with a little bit of tap water, and I'm just applying them with a fine brush, and they have the perfect amount of opacity and coverage that I desire. I don't have to go over with a second coat or anything. They're just one brush stroke and you've got that scrape and that chip on there. I'm very pleased with this. If you're concerned with what color I'm using there, because it looks pretty good, that is the yellow-green and the chipping brown color applied over the 4BO. That looks pretty good, I'll say. And now here I'm doing my very best to give these a fair shake at brush painting smoothly on a flat surface. Again, I don't ever do this because I'm not very good at it. I rely heavily on my airbrush for such a situation. I did about 5 coats here back and forth, letting it dry, and it dries in like 3 minutes. It's very quick, so I apply a coat, wait a couple minutes, and then go back with the next coat. Doing my best to do a good job here. Sorry if this is really bad, I apologize. But these paints, they're perfectly fine for this. They basically gave me as smooth a finish as I would expect with any other paint, so very satisfied with that, especially with how quickly they dry between each coat. Now this was definitely a surprise. They brush and airbrush to the exact same final color. This is basically impossible with other paints. Other paints, when you brush paint them versus airbrush them, you end up with a different saturation because of the different pigment densities, essentially. But with this paint, it's the same final color. There's a very slight difference in sheen, which won't matter because I'm going to apply a varnish at some point in my weathering process, of course. With this ability, I can now paint hard edge camouflage schemes without masking. I can simply airbrush the entire thing freehand, and then take a little bit of one of the two paints on a paintbrush and make the feathered edge hard edge. So in conclusion, these Atom paints, I am very impressed with them. They are the best water-based paints I've ever had the experience of airbrushing, which may be a low bar in certain regards, but I'm being serious. They airbrush very well, the atomization, the fine lines, also the durability and the smoothness of the finish, drying time, self-leveling, they're all far superior to any other water-based paint I've ever tried. And they really are bringing some of the benefits of the lacquer-based paint into the water-based range, essentially. Now, personally, I'm going to stick with my lacquers because I can vent outside with my current setup. But if you're someone who uses water-based paints for some of the reasons we discussed earlier, I definitely think you should honestly give at least one of these bottles a try and see how it works for you, because I was very impressed with these, and no, there is no check from Mig Ammo coming in the mail to me. I'm actually being honest. I will continue to test these paints, mainly for brush painting applications, though I will also give that hard edge camouflage without masking idea a try, because I'm very excited to be able to not have to mask a model, just airbrush it freehand, and then tighten up that feathered edge with a pass or two of the paintbrush, using a paint that brushes to the same color as it does airbrush. Alright, if you have any questions or comments, post them on below. If I missed anything you want me to test, post that below and I'll give it a try and get back to you. If you like my work, you can support me on Patreon. Just $1 a month there really helps me making these videos. As always, I'll see you guys next time. Until then, stay safe and happy modeling. See ya.